Welcome to the Leonie dress tutorial. Please don't mind the ugly fabric I'm using. I thrifted it and thought it would be better because it has an obvious wrong and right side. So the first step is to stitch the armholes, and this is optional but recommended if your fabric is very thin or it's prone to fraying or stretching. So sew a regular stitch around all 4 armholes using a 3 to 5 millimeter seam allowance, so that's 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch. Then we are going to prepare the straps. So sew the short end of 2 strap pieces together to make one long one. So place them right sides together and sew with a 7 millimeter or 1/4 inch seam allowance. Press open and repeat for the other strap pieces to make 2 long straps. Then fold each strap lengthwise wrong sides together and press the fold to create a crease. Then fold both long edges toward the center crease and press again. And then to finish the top of the strap, you're going to unfold the right hand fold of the strap. Then fold the short end of the strap by 1 centimeter towards the wrong side. Then fold the left side in, then fold the right side over the top, tucking inside the left fold. Pin or clip the ends. Alternatively, you can use a bias tape maker tool to fold the strips. It's super handful. I love using that little tool. I use it all the time, so I highly recommend you get one. I'm using a size 18 millimeter, and this is how I do it. Then the third step is to gather the front and the back. So sew 2 rows of basting stitches on the right side of the fabric. Backstitch at the beginning, but leave long thread tails at the other end to pull the fabric. So the first one at 5 millimeters, 3/16 of an inch, and the second at 1.2, half an inch seam allowance. So then pull on the threads to gather the front and the back to the length of the yoke for view A and C, or the lace for view B. Then distribute the gathers evenly and secure the gathering by tying the threads together in a double knot. That's very important so that you don't end up with a neckline that is too long. Then set the back aside for now. Then the next step is to sew the piping if you are making view A or you'd like to add that option to your dress. The first step is to place your piping cord on the wrong side of your bias strip in the center. Then fold the bias strip in half and pin along your piping cord. Then using a zipper foot, sew along the piping cord to secure it in place inside the bias. Then aligning the raw edges, place the piping on the right side of the front neckline and pin. And then still using your zipper foot, sew along the cord at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Your seam should be closest to the piping, left of the piping seam. Then cut off any excess piping at each side if needed. Then the next step is to sew the yoke for view A, so with piping. Pin the front neckline to the yoke, wrong sides together, and sew at 7 millimeter or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So here it's better if you sew with the piping facing you. Press the seam allowance to flatten the gathers. Then flip the yoke up and press the seam allowance towards the yoke. From the right side, fold the yoke over the seam allowance and press. From the wrong side, pin and sew right under your seam allowance. And here you can use an edge stitching foot to be more precise. It's really useful. And if you sewed the piping, make sure to sew as close to the cord as possible to enclose all previous seams, so using your zipper foot. So your stitches should sit right under your seam allowance. And this is how it should look from the right side with the piping. Then remove the gathering stitches and press the seam allowance towards the yoke. And this is optional, but you can top stitch the seam allowance to the yoke if you'd like. Then we're going to finish the yoke with binding for view A. So place the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the yoke and pin and sew at 7 millimeter or 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then press the seam allowance towards the binding, so from the right side, and then refold the raw edge of the binding to the edge of the neckline and fold again to cover the seam by a couple of millimeters, so 1/8 of an inch. Pin and make sure that your pins fall right under the binding on the wrong side. Then edge stitch along the folded edge. This is how it should look from the right side and the wrong side. Then give it a good press. Pin the front neckline to the yoke, wrong sides together, and sew at 7 mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Press the seam allowance to flatten the gathers. Then flip the yoke up and press the seam allowance towards the yoke. From the right side, fold the yoke over the seam allowance and press. From the wrong side, pin and sew right under your seam allowance. And here you can use an edge stitching foot to be more precise. It's really useful. Then remove the gathering stitches and press the seam allowance towards the yoke. So now we are going to finish the yoke with lace edging for view C. So fold the top raw edge of the yoke over to the right side twice by 5 mm, 1/4 of an inch, and press. You're essentially creating a hem but towards the right side of the fabric. Then place the bottom edge of the lace underneath the fold so that they overlap by a couple of millimeters, 1/8 of an inch, and pin. Then edge stitch the folded seam allowance to the lace. This is how it should look. Then flip the lace up and the seam allowance down, and from the right side press the lace up. From the wrong side, press the seam allowance down. Then from the right side, top stitch the bodice to the seam allowance to 3 mm, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Cut off any excess lace that you have on the sides. Then remove the gathering stitches if you haven't done so already. The next step is to sew the lace yoke for view B. So prepare your binding by pressing it as follows. So fold each strip lengthwise, wrong sides together, and press. Then fold both long edges towards the center crease and press. So place the right side of your binding to the wrong side of your neckline and pin. Then sew at a 7 mm seam allowance, and you can sew with the gathers facing you or the binding, it's up to you. Then remove the gathering stitches. Give it a good press, and then place the bottom edge of the lace over the seam and fold the binding so it overlaps with the lace by a couple of millimeters. Here I'm using a wider seam allowance on the lace because I don't want that little scallop edge to show. I just want it to be straight, so I'm going to take all of the scallop edge in my seam allowance. But if you only have like a couple of millimeters seam allowance on your lace, you'll want to place it on the seam. Then edge stitch along the fold of the binding. And flip the lace over, and from the wrong side, press the seam allowance down towards the dress. From the right side, press the seam allowance again, flattening the gathers, and cut off any excess lace that you have on the sides. Then top stitch the seam allowance along the edge of the dress, so over the gathers. Then we're going to sew the back neckline for view A. So place the right side of your binding to the wrong side of your neckline and pin. Then sew at a 7 mm seam allowance, and you can sew with the gathers facing you or the binding, it's up to you. Then press the seam allowance towards the binding, so from the right side, and fold the binding over to cover the seam just by a couple of millimeters and pin. Your pins should fall right under the seam allowance on the wrong side. Then edge stitch along the fold. Remove your gathering stitches and give it a good press. So then we are going to sew the lace insertion for view C. So for the front and the back, fold over to the right side the bottom raw edge of the dress by 5 mm or 1/4 of an inch twice and press. So you're essentially creating a hem, but towards the right side of the fabric. Here I'm not using lace insertion because it doesn't have two straight edges, but that's okay. I'll just be sewing the lace with a bit more seam allowance on the side that's not straight. Place the top edge of the lace underneath the seam allowance so that they overlap by a couple of millimeters, 1/8 of an inch, and pin. Then edge stitch the folded seam allowance to the lace. Flip and press the lace with the seam allowance towards the dress from the right side. Then from the wrong side, press the seam allowance again towards the dress and set aside. I'm going to sew the ruffle tier for view C. Start by finishing the top raw edges of both tiers by overlocking or overcasting. This is what the overcasting foot should look like for your sewing machine. And make sure to not cut any seam allowance with your serger. Then sew 2 or 3 rows of basting stitches along the top edge of both tiers. The first row should be sewn at 7 mm, a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and the following ones at 7 mm from each other. Backstitch at the beginning and leave long threads at the end. This is optional, but you can mark a guideline between your 2 rows, 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch from the top edge. This is where you will be placing your lace in the next step. Then pull on the long threads to gather the fabric to the width of the dress and distribute the gathers evenly. My arms were hurting here from all the gathering, so my husband came to help me a little bit. That's why the arms look a bit different. Then pin 1 tier to the front at the sides, so on the lace, right sides together. Place the edge of the lace 1 cm down, so 3/8 of an inch, or on your guideline from the edge of the ruffle tier. Then sew along the edge of the lace. Then flip the dress over and press the seam allowance towards the hem from the wrong side and the right side of the dress, and repeat for the other tier. Then we're going to sew the lace insertion for view B. So on the right side of the fabric, join the lace markings by tracing a line. These indicate the top and bottom edges of your lace. Then pin the lace, or hold it as you're sewing, between the markings and edge stitch the lace to the bodice on the top and bottom edges. Then from the wrong side of the fabric, trace a line in the middle of the lace stitch lines. Then cut along that line, being careful not to cut your lace. It's to create a seam allowance on each side of the lace. Trim the seam allowances down to 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch if it's wider than that, and press the slit open so that the right side of the fabric shows at the top and bottom of the lace. Then fold the seam allowances twice to enclose their raw edges and press. You can pin them to keep them in place, but I like to simply refold them as I'm sewing. Then edge stitch the seam allowances to the bodice along the fold and press. Repeat for the other side. We're going to sew the side seams for the versions with no zippers. So place the front and back wrong sides together and pin the side seams. For view B and C, make sure the front and back are well aligned at the lace insertion. Sew at 5 mm, just under 1/4 of an inch. So as a guideline, 5 mm is, for me, between the transparent and metal part of my presser foot. I just align my fabric edge with that guideline and press the seam to the back. Flip the bodice wrong side out and give it a good press. Then sew the side seams again at 7 mm or 1/4 of an inch to enclose the raw edge. Then press to the back. Turn the dress right side out and check the side seams to make sure you enclose the raw edges well. And if you have little threads sticking out, you can turn your dress wrong side out again and sew a couple of millimeters wider than your previous seam. Then we are going to sew the straps. So unfold one long edge of your strap and place it right side down on the wrong side of the armhole, aligning the strap seam to the dress side seam. Pin and sew at 7 mm neckline to neckline. Then from the wrong side, flip and press the strap up. And from the right side, press the seam allowance towards the strap. At the armhole, bring the pre-folded edge of the strap over the seam to cover it by a couple of millimeters, a quarter of an inch. Pin, and then pin the rest of the strap end to end. And here you can use a hump jumper or a piece of folded fabric to place under your presser foot to start sewing at the strap if it's a little bit too thick. You want your presser foot to lay horizontally. If it's tilted, it might not start. Then repeat for the other armhole. Then starting at one end of the strap, sew along the folded edge to the other end of the strap. We are going to sew the straps if you have zippers. Finish all 4 side seams by serging or overcasting with your sewing machine, and don't cut any seam allowance away with your serger. Place the right side of the strap to the wrong side of the armhole, letting the strap hang by 1 centimeter, 1/3 of an inch, over the edge at the side seam. Then fold that onto the right side and pin the strap to the dress. Sew at 7 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch and press the seam allowance towards the strap from the right side. Flip the corner right side out and bring the folded edge over the seam by a couple of millimeters, 1/8 of an inch, and pin. Then starting at one end of the strap, sew along the folded edge to the other end. Press and repeat for all straps. Then we are going to sew the invisible zippers. Make a mark on the wrong side of your zippers around 4 centimeters or 1 inch and 5/8 from the bottom and on each side. Then cut the top tape ends of the zippers above the top stop so that it will line up at the edge of your armhole. Then place the zipper right side down on the right side of your front or back. Align the top stop of the zipper with the edge of the armhole and the side of the zipper against the stitches, not at the edge of the side seam, and pin. Using your invisible zipper foot, sew along the zipper teeth, uncurling them and pushing them to the side with your finger as you're sewing. Stop at the mark and backstitch. Then place the other side of the zipper on the left side seam of your back or front, right sides together. Make sure the zipper is not twisted and sew along the zipper teeth. Make sure to change the side of your presser foot. Then change to your regular foot and finish sewing the side seams right sides together. Start sewing around 7 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch before where the zipper seam ends and make the seam allowance around 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch wider. Then, from the right side, top stitch the straps to the seam allowance on each side of each zipper. Then close the zipper and from the wrong side, press the seam open to the bottom edge of the dress, and from the right side, press over the zipper to smooth the seam. Then repeat for the other side. And the last step is to hem the dress. Then fold over and press the bottom raw edge to the wrong side by 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch, twice to create your hem. Then pin it and edge stitch along the fold of the hem from the wrong side of the garment, and then give it a good press. Alternatively, you can use the rolled hem presser foot to hem your dress, and that's my preferred method. It looks like this, and it is so useful. It makes a really neat seam, and it's pretty fast once you get the hang of it, so I highly recommend you try. The ties are already finished, but I like to tie a simple knot at the end for a prettier look. You could also add tassels, beads, or any little detail you like to make them your own. The last thing to do is to tie your ties together. The top of the neckline should sit between your collarbone and mid-chest for the intended fit. If they aren't tied enough, the back will droop and the side seams won't hang parallel to your body. So make sure you play with the ties and how tight they are to get the right fit. Your Leonie dress is done! I hope you enjoyed sewing it and will love wearing it even more. Please don't hesitate to comment below if you have any questions or feedback.